£8.1 billion last month. That's the highest figure for February since records began. The Office for National Statistics said that borrowing was £17.6 billion higher compared to February last year, reflecting the cost of pandemic support measures. Well, we can speak now to Dr. Arun Advani, who's an assistant professor in economics at the University of Warwick and the Cage Research Centre. Good to have you with us. So give us your assessment of that admittedly huge sum compared to the previous year.
Yeah, so borrowing numbers are, very, very high. The borrowing for February is, sort of another £400 per adult in the country. So these are big numbers to be adding on top of what has already been a kind of major set of borrowing. It's sort of been predicted. There's not a surprise to anyone, I think. Exactly what the number was going to be was unknown, but we've known that what the government has been doing has been lots and lots of support for the economy, both for households through the furlough scheme and through self-employment schemes, through the top-up to the £20 a week on universal credit, and at the same time a whole load of support for businesses. So we knew that with all that spending going on and nothing new to come in on taxes, there are bits of information in here, but we're sort of probably not surprised that numbers are going to be pretty high. Interestingly, we haven't yet quite broken that psychological barrier of debt being more than 100% of GDP.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you about that, because I know that's one of the questions that you've been considering, whether we would reach that debt equals 100% of GDP. That, as you say, psychologically would be a really huge thing for any nation to breach that.
Yeah, so I think that's it's a sort of thing that sticks in people's minds. It feels like a very big number. In one sense, it's not really economically important. It doesn't really matter. We've been here before. After both of the world wars, debt was well above 100. In one point, it was twice annual GDP. So these aren't numbers that we've never seen before. We've never seen outside wartime, or outside of the aftermath of wartime. So it gives you a sense for how big the scale of coronavirus has been. In terms of affordability, though, it's worth noting that when you look at them, one of the numbers that came out today is what's the cost of interest payments in February and how have they changed. So that's actually what the government has to pay to have all this debt. And that's gone up, but it's gone up by about £1 billion. So that's sort of £20 a head for adults in the country. So that's, it's not nothing, but it kind of ties in with that £20 a week, relates to that £20 a week kind of idea. This is £20 for the month. But it tells you that although government has put on a lot of extra debt, it's had to borrow a lot to do all the things it's been doing. Because interest rates are very low, it's not the case that somehow the cost of having that debt is sort of skyrocketing and spiraling, and that we're going to have to be paying loads more money sort of to deal with the debt. Obviously, at some point, there is this kind of pile of debt out there. But the cost of paying interest on that debt, it hasn't really been increasing in some kind of big dramatic way, which is what we'd be more worried about in terms of thinking about affordability.
And what we don't know yet in terms of looking at the ledger, as it were, is we don't know about those self-assessment tax returns, which should all be in by now, and how that will impact the public finances.
Yeah, so self-assessment's been one of those numbers that people wanted to watch. So as a reminder for people, self-assessment tax is the tax that people who have to file a tax form pay, rather than people who just have an employment and get the money taken by their employer for them. And it's a number that people have been looking out for, because there's been a number of complications with self-assessment this year. Normally, people who file taxes would have paid some money ahead of time last July. They also then would have finished paying all the tax they owed back in January. But the government got rid of that payment in July because people were, understandably finding it hard to find the money at that point in time, right at the end of first lockdown. They moved the January deadline effectively to February. They didn't officially move it, but they got rid of the fine for paying a month late. And so basically, by the end of February, we now have a number that's sort of comparable to the number last year, so we get a sense for what that looks like. And what we see is basically there's been a drop. We're down probably a couple of £1 billion on where we'd expect to be £1 billion on last year. So again, there's a reduction on what's come in. It hasn't been kind of hugely dramatic. It's not as big as some people I think were fearing, but there is clearly less money coming in. It's important because remember the tax that people have just been filing is actually for the tax year that finished back in April 2020, right at the beginning of the first lockdown. So actually you'd hope there wouldn't have been too much effect at all. So even any decline does kind of give some idea of how bad March must have been for some people, that there's been this decline, as well as maybe some people who are just going to be paying late and saying, I know I'm going to be fined, I know I'm going to have to pay a penalty, but I just can't afford it right now.
Okay, good to get your assessment of all of that. Dr. Arun Advani, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks.